Alrighty, y'all, we're going to get started now. So I want to welcome everyone to the State of Policing panel event. We're grateful for everybody attending in person and also online, and especially to our panelists, Dr. Borrego, our chair for the Criminal Justice Department at MSU, and then Sam Rabins, licensed clinical social worker and associate director of clinical services at WellPower, and Chief Jason Melendor of Auraria. And we really want to thank them making time for the civic discussion. And we will now introduce themselves as Dr. Brady. Let's start.
Is there anything you want us to highlight in introducing ourselves?
I suppose like what led you to your field of work and.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Dr. B here, Associate Professor and Chair of Criminal Justice here at MSU Denver. I've been here at MSU Denver since 2015. What led me to my research, my first area of research, which is fatal police citizen encounters, is that I had an internship with the Bureau of Justice Statistics. My first year as a master's student, and ended up in that area, looking at that kind of deaths in custody program that was fairly new, maybe like 5-6 years old. And then just kind of ran from there, and then recently pivoted a little bit more to more like public criminology and working with the Denver Sheriff's Department and their co-responder model inside the jail for people who are in crisis. So interviewing deputies and clinicians and seeing how that's going, also providing some expertise and more diversity related training that clinicians should have inside jail.
All right, I'm gonna go quick. If you're really interested, you can go to our website. There's a whole thing on there. But I've been on campus since 2000. Started as a Metro student, Metro alum. So I know, go Roadrunners. I just stayed. So I've been here as a police officer since 2001. It's my 23rd year. I worked through every rank in the police department. And the acting chief, where I am the chief. So I was out here for a long time. It took them a while, but we got there. And so I also have a master's degree from CU Denver. I also teach at CU Denver, which some of my students are here tonight. So if you hear them cheering, it's good. As you know, finals are coming up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Rabins. I'm the Associate Director of Criminal Justice Services at WellPower. I'm originally from Chicago and moved to Denver to pursue skiing mostly, but also got my master's degree in social work when I came out here. And I've been with WellPower, which was formerly Mental Health Center at Denver, since 2012. So I've been with them for 12 years, which is a very long time in my book. We are Denver County's community mental health center. So we provide community mental health services to people who live in the city and county of Denver. We also see people who live outside of Denver, but have some primary care located in Denver. I started as a clinical case manager while I was pursuing my clinical license with WellPower, and then helped start our first Denver co-responder program in 2016 with the Denver Police Department, and have since helped expand our program out to all first responder communities within Denver County, including Auraria campus. So I directly supervise our Auraria campus co-responder program, and also helped formulate and now oversee our STAR program, which is all our alternative response model to sending clinicians and EMS paramedics or EMTs instead of police officers to 911.
All right, perfect. Couple more notes. I know this is an essential discussion to have, and I'm very proud and grateful there's been such interest from our community. And I want us all to acknowledge that this is a dialogue about civic engagement. Policing can create a lot of tension pretty easily. So we ask that everyone is respectful of each other's questions and beliefs. And it's most important to acknowledge this is a people issue and not a political issue. While some of the questions will be directed towards one of our panelists, please, everyone, feel free to comment on anything. And so our first one, what comes to mind when you hear the police should be abolished? And I'll start with you, Chief, under this thing.
So my first question would be, what that? I mean, the police respond to everything in our society. And part of the reason that we are at where we're at, because there is such a lack of services outside of law enforcement for people. Our mental health system is atrocious. It leads to points where there's no other help for people. And I think partly out of this frustration, people just call the police to get some type of resolution. And the police aren't ever trained or designed to be the really holistic approach for everything in society, even though it has become that. And that's where a lot of situations really devolve and have really bad outcomes because there's just nothing else to help. So they call the police and we're expected to make really bad situations better. And that's just not always possible. So when you say, you know, abolish the police or defund the police, to me, it's if that were to happen, who is going to protect society? Who is going to respond and deal with these social issues and help ensure that there's safe communities and that people aren't being victimized and that we have social order? Because that is the only way we're able to maintain an organized society and people are safe.
Yeah, I mean, my response isn't much different, right? It just, when people say that, they're looking for something else and it's usually reform. But it goes back to that idea of like, where are the social services, right? It's not necessarily, like, I think when people say that they're coming from an idea of like, they might have vicarious trauma, they might have personal trauma. And they're like, I don't want to deal with them, I want to deal with somebody else. But if we look at the way we've organized policing, we've made it so people have to call police and you haven't funded social services. So I think that you have some people that are just abolitionists in general, and that's like their core belief. They call for abolition of police, they call for no more prisons, jails, those types of things. But I think as a whole and as a country, it's calling more for reform and healing and different approaches to what public safety is.
Yeah, and I think I would just ditto those things and add that the programs that WellPower, Co-Responder Star, and we have co-responders with Denver Police. The way Denver County works is a little funky. It's not like any other city and county of the way it was established jurisdictionally. So we have co-responders with police, fire, sheriffs, Auraria campus, RTE, Parks and Rec. We have case managers that do staff handoffs, and we have our alternative response program. So we are trying to be a part of the reform that people are asking for. And we are going to work side by side with our first responder entities as though people are calling 911 for help, as Chief Mullender said, right? Whether it's your community was taught to call 911, your community was taught absolutely not to call 911, but someone's calling on your behalf. It's a known number in society. And unfortunately, it's been one of the only numbers that we're trying to establish more numbers like 988, like crisis lines, but it's been one of the only numbers we've been able to use. And so it sticks in people's brains. So police are responding. We're trying to be a part of the reform. We're trying to say, we'll respond with anyone. But our goal is to really meet someone where they're at in the community and provide that mental health support that officers, like Chief Mullender said, officers aren't trained to do. We get tons of, we have schooling and clinical training and work experience and life experience. People go into the field because of life experience and their own, personal history as well. And so we are coming from that approach of we will go with anyone to provide support. And that's our main goal. And we recognize that police aren't the end all be all response for people. And that's why we create alternative response models like our STAR model.
All right, perfect. Another question for everyone. Will you tell us about the challenges and opportunities presented by emerging issues such as mental health crises, substance abuse, and housing instability in our community? And Sam would like to start this time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Where do I begin? I think I don't remember which one of you said it, but you said it of like, we've been funding different entities, but we haven't funded social support services. And although we look at funding, that is absolutely still the case where social support services need a lot more funding. It's really hard to prove that I need to fund something for preventative work. People look at numbers and data to do funding, and that often you get those numbers after intervention work, not prevention work. But we need those things. People also need basic needs. I can't focus on my anxiety or my depression or my other mental health issues that are happening if I don't have a safe place to go at night, right? And a safe place looks different for everyone. I want to recognize and honor that. But if I don't have a safe place to go, I may not be able to focus on my anxiety and depression. Cultures also look at mental health differently, right? And so we have to be mindful of that, and also look at substance use differently, right? Substance use is also a coping skill for people who have severe and persistent mental illness. And the way our systems read right now is that they are two separate entities. When we look at when someone's imminently in danger, we look at, is it mental health or is it substance use? We don't look at them as tied together, even though we as clinicians know that they very much are. Our system doesn't look at that. And so we have a ton. Our system is by no means perfect. In fact, it's way more imperfect than it is perfect. And we have a lot of room to grow and a lot to learn. yeah, I think we have really innovative programs in Denver and in Colorado in general, and we should be proud of those innovative programs, but that doesn't mean the system is changing rapidly as a whole. We're trying to work within the system that we have to provide services. So yeah, there's a lot of issues of and challenges dealing with people with severe and persistent mental illness or, environmental mental health concerns like situational depression, because people are using substances. Again, it's looked at differently. There's lack of funding. We don't have housing stability in at least Denver County. We have many social issues right now.
Okay, next question. So for Dr. Borrego specifically, what are the top 3 root causes of crime, and what are the most effective methods for deterring crime?
My guess is you're wanting me to say like people do this because they're bad people, because they do this. But it goes back to what we've established before. Are there bad people in the world? Absolutely, yes. But a lot of times, like what type of crimes are they committing, right? Are they survival crimes, or is it because they have a comorbidity of substance use or mental illness? And something else I'm going to throw out to you that is we've been doing over with criminal justice and speech hearing language sciences is looking at traumatic brain injuries, which is something that is not prevalent in terms of research and is emerging more. And personally, my husband just sustained a traumatic brain injury in December, and I'm seeing like November, complete differences in his personality and everything. And so you're thinking about individuals who aren't, and he got support, right? Hospitals, caseworkers, therapy, all these different things. Now imagine someone that doesn't have any of those services, right? Where are you going? Your family has no idea what a traumatic brain injury. You think you just got in a fight and you're just having a little concussion, you'll be fine. Actually, there's a whole bunch of different stuff that's going on in your brain. And we're seeing that about, it's 50+% of people who are incarcerated have a history or current traumatic brain injury, right? So when I'm thinking about what are the causes of crime, it's lack of resources, lack of medical help, social supports, mental health supports, the school to prison pipeline, hyper-criminalizing drug use. And what do we do about it? We invest in our communities and our people, but we still aren't seeing criminal justice as a public health problem. So the idea is that we need to entangle them a little bit more. And what are we doing? What are the services we're providing? Yeah, people are incarcerated, but why are we adding on cash bonds to people who can't pay? And we know they're just going back to the streets. So a lot of times it's survival, ways to pay bills, lack of self-control due to other types of health problems, brain injuries, substance use, trauma. I don't know what else to do. So that's fine. That's it.
Okay. Question for Sam. What is STAR's mission and why was STAR created?
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk real quickly about the history of all of our programs because that leads into kind of how STAR was created. So we started our co-responder programs in 2016 with the Denver Police Department. It was myself and 2 other clinicians that helped start this. We had no idea what we were doing. It was a pretty new concept to this country. I believe the first co-responder program was developed in the 70s, but never really took off, which boggles my mind. But it really started taking, there was a few programs before us. Absolutely, we were not the first. We might be the largest now in the country, but we are definitely not the first. Yeah, so in 2016, we went out and we just said, we just want to help people in crisis and we want to meet them where they're at. And we want to make sure that every single police officer knows who we are so that they can use us as a resource every single time someone comes to them and says, I have a concern I'm mentally ill, I'm having anxiety, I have a TBI, they might have an IDD that's IDD diagnosis, intellectual developmental delay, anything. We just want to help with whatever someone's experiencing. If it's crisis involved, we want to meet them where they're at and provide them the resources that they need in that moment. So we go out, we do our thing, we learn how Denver works from the police perspective and how that intersects with the mental health system. And then we also learned that we're going on a lot of calls with police that police shouldn't be on. When someone calls in and says, hey, there's a houseless individual in the community, I'm a concerned citizen, I'm really worried about that. There's no crime being committed. Why are we sending police out to that? There's no reason, right? But again, we go back to lack of resources, lack of phone numbers that people remember. People still call 911 and they still are concerned about that person's welfare. Why not send a more appropriate response to that person so we don't trigger them from past experiences? We're not further escalating a situation and we're providing even more trauma-informed care than our co-responders can, because our co-responders they're showing up with police every time. So we went to Eugene, Oregon, which developed the CAHOOTS program, which was an alternative response model that was really successful. And so a group of individuals from Denver County went out, looked at that program, modeled our STAR program, which stands for Support Team Assisted Response. And we started that in June of 2020. It took off. It was a much needed program. And our goal is to provide for the community by the community. That's not our official tagline. I just want to be very clear, but that is our goal. It's a great one. It's not our official tagline, but we really want to represent the community when we respond. We are still responding to calls that come in through the 911 system, the non-emergency line, and we actually have a STAR specific line that we can respond through. And we are a Denver County only. Denver's STAR program is Denver County only. We actually also have a STAR program in Arvada. So if you live in Arvada and you see them, say hey. Yeah, we are there to provide mental health and behavioral health care to individuals who call the emergency system that don't need a police response. We included a medic with us because people who have severe and persistent mental illness specifically also commonly have medical concerns. TBI might be an issue. Uncontrolled diabetes, we've seen that affect people's mental illness. UTIs can affect people's mental illness, right? And so it's really important that we team up together to provide that care simultaneously into the community. We started with one van, meaning we had one clinician and one medic, and now we've grown to 16 clinicians and 16 medics, so 8 vans. And that's since 2020, that's rapid expansion. And we also we really want to represent the community. And so I think about after year 1, which was the pilot program, we expanded to have more community partners be a part of the STAR program. So you have Wellpower providing the clinician, Denver Health providing the medic, Servicios de la Raza providing all of our wraparound services and follow-up care. We have a STAR Community Advisory Committee they meet once a month. The public is welcome to join that. It's actually happening right now. So next month you can join it. And we work with 911 Communications, Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, and always take input from our community members to provide a better response.
We want to ask questions or at the end?
At the end, yes. All right, so question for Chief Malender. What strategies are effective in promoting community trust and cooperation with law enforcement, particularly in diverse or marginalized?
So definitely a challenge over the last few years. The relationships between communities and law enforcement have definitely devolved, and that is something that it's for a slew of reasons, right? The reality is policing gets its authority from the community, and police officers are members of the community. And when you don't look at that, you don't understand that, then ultimately you're going to have a breakdown of trust, because nobody likes people in authority. Let's just be honest, right? And most good people are only meeting police officers when you do a traffic offense and they're pulling you over, which makes no one happy, or if you're the victim of a crime. Also a time where people don't have a good interaction for the most part. So you're not having that opportunity to really build trust and to build a relationship where they understand that the vast majority of police officers are good people doing an almost impossible job for the right reasons. And when you look at how many police officers are in our country, which is around 850,000 to 1 million, depending on who you count and how, that's a lot of police officers. That's millions of contacts happening every day that are going well. What we see are the few that go really bad, and those are what make the media, because it's a story. And the problem with policing is that if one cop does something anywhere in the world now, it reflects on every police officer everywhere. You say, see, they're racist, see, they're horrible, see, they're violent. You're taking a very small percentage of what's happening and applying it to an entire profession. And again, the vast majority of police officers go through an immense amount of screening to make sure they're good people. They go through a vast amount of training, and they're dedicated public servants that care about the community. They're out there 24 hours a day. Doesn't matter if it's 2 o'clock Christmas morning. They're making sure that people aren't victimized, that they're safe. And we've really lost that ability to connect. And I think the community has forgotten really what much they do just to help keep everyone safe. And that's part of the police problem too. Not to get into the history of policing or the errors of policing, 'cause it's a whole semester class in and of itself, but when we had, if we go back to even 9/11, right, there was a huge push for more authoritarian police after that because people were scared and they wanted to see a stronger police presence and a stronger police response to things. And that really shifted the dynamic of how the police interacted with their communities. And unfortunately, I think what we've seen now is that kind of pendulum swing the other way to the extreme where they say, you know what, the police aren't there for us anymore. They are too authoritarian. They're not the caring people we want. Even though that might not be the case, that's how it's viewed. So I think to build that trust back takes transparency, it takes openness, and takes a willingness from not only the police, but also the community just to interact and ask questions and understand each other better. Sorry, it's a long answer.
No, that's perfect.
Can I add on?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, anybody.
And you went back to a good point, right? Of like, we don't know the number of contacts. So we don't even, I told you I was an intern on fatal police citizen encounters. We still don't have a national database of how often those occur. Nationally, we have no idea. It's a guess. The media keeps better count, but we also don't have a count of like how many contacts we have. So we can't say this percentage of contacts end up in force that doesn't lead to death or force that does lead to death. And then within that, there's a whole bunch of different types. Like my whole dissertation was looking at all different types of death. Like people were eaten by alligators running away from police. Yes, it's happened twice in Florida back-to-back years. That's a fatal police citizen encounter death because they're running away from the police. So it's not all police involved shooting. Some people will throw the drugs that they have and swallow them, and hopefully they don't get caught and they burst in their stomach. They have an overdose. There's a whole bunch of different types of police citizen contacts, but because we don't have that data, we can't efficiently or effectively categorize what these types of interactions are. And so we can't pinpoint like, hey, and I see policing as like more a systemic problem, right? We have a lot of great individual people who are police officers. But when we don't look at that data and we don't have those parameters in place, we can't go and we can't say, hey, out of these 18,000 plus police departments, you need some work here, right? It's not until you get a whole bunch of lawsuits, whole bunch of whatever, the federal government comes in through memorandum of agreements. They come in for like a few years. I know Commerce City has had this happen close to when I was a new professor. Then they leave. And then like, how much do you change systemically inside that department? And then usually what we see is that they kind of go back to how things were. And so you need effective leadership, people who understand the world. So then it's like a top-down situation and then lead that type of force. And so, yeah, it leads back to data. And without that data, we cannot make informed decisions or have productive conversations sometimes.
Perfect. This is almost a follow-up question. How does research inform policing practices, and what are some current areas of interest for research and law enforcement?
Well, unfortunately, yeah, this is during my dissertation, which was like 15 years ago. There was 50 years already building up of like asking for this type of data and this data set, and they kind of tried, and they being the federal government, but then it's kind of like, hey guys, you want to give us your data? No, okay, that's cool, thanks. And then we just kind of go on from there, right? And so you would think we can keep a whole bunch of track. I'm sure you have data on a whole bunch of stuff, right? But we can keep track of stuff. But for some reason, why can't we do this? So I think there's those opportunities. Obviously, that's my one kind of area. But having police departments that are looking to partner with researchers and universities and those types of things. So my mentor does a lot of randomized controlled trials. Hopefully psychology students, those are. So actually we looked at the effects of TASER when I was a graduate student, had TASE students to see if your cognitive functioning declines after being tased. It does for about 24 hours. Yeah, okay, I'd say that. But it's like having those, even with body worn cameras, right? How are we rolling those out? You can't just be like, here's a body worn camera, here's all the data, here's when you turn, like, there needs to be policy built from that. And so having those partnerships, like in how, like using randomized control trials if you can, or other types of research methodology that helps you get to like what's effective, what are the outcomes, what are you looking for, what are good tools, what are bad tools, all the in-betweens and those types of things are necessary. So like building those partnerships, which is, again, where I kind of say I'm a public criminologist, is because I don't want to just sit back here, do my reading, do my research and be like, here are all the problems. I want to talk to the practitioners. I want to talk to deputies. I want to talk to people who are the clients and everything and say, hey, how's it going? How's it working? What are the outcomes? What are you looking for? Okay, how do we make this better? And then also, using sound methodology.
I want to add to that too, like. We also have to look at data, right, to increase our programming, to start our programming, right, to say like how we are effective as conduits of reform, right? Like we still have to look at data to say like what we're doing is working. And what's challenging with data collection, just like you were saying, is it's not collected well. And so, I can tell you based on how my clinicians enter their documentation in our well-powered EHR system, on specific clinical encounters, right? So I say that because it's very specific times that we enter this data that we've, on the calls that we are on, that we've reduced arrest rates and tickets and citations to under 2%. That is awesome. I can't tell you what that number was before on mental health incidents, right? Someone once said like 18%, and I don't know where they got that number from, because to be able to data collect when someone's experiencing a mental health concern or a behavioral health concern on a police call is incredibly challenging because calls get coded by dispatch. I might call in and say it's a burglary. It gets coded as a burglary. It's not a burglary. And in fact, the primary issue is probably mental health and it doesn't always get recoded, right? Or maybe it is a burglary, right? And there's also mental health stuff happening. And so it's really hard to track that data from that perspective too. We're trying to put numbers to people and that is hard, right? You're trying to quantitatively collect data that is qualitative in nature. And so that's the system we live in and we are trying. Denver County specifically, with STAR and with some of our programs under the Department of Safety have hired a third-party data collection group called Urban Institute that's trying to better analyze this data for us. And it's challenging. Because again, you're putting numbers to people and hearing this, hearing the stories, talking to people is really where you're going to learn. Is this effective?
If I may.
Yeah.
So while there is a lack of national data collection, as a profession, law enforcement documents more than almost anyone else. Every call they're going on, they're documenting it. Every time they use of force, they're documenting and they're articulating exactly why and exactly what happened. And now we have body cameras, which a lot of people are like, oh, you must hate those things. I love these things, and almost every officer I have loves them as well, because now every call we go on, there's no subjectivity. And the reality is sometimes people just don't tell the truth. And nobody looks into it. Nobody says, well, that doesn't even make sense. Say, oh, the police are terrible. The police are wrong. Look what the police did to that person. But now I said, well, actually, we have a video. I would love to show you what happened. And it actually has reduced complaints significantly because people call and say, your officer was incredibly rude. I say, oh, one moment. I will literally pull up the body cam video and watch it and say, well, here's what I see. And most of the time they go, oh, well, yeah, I guess I don't need to make a complaint. I just want to let you know. Because again, a lot of it is subjective. A lot of it is very personal, but having that firm video, that firm evidence, that firm account of what happened, that is from an unbiased, impartial camera can really help clarify what really did happen in situations. And again, we document everything. So it's not a matter of a lack of accountability or not having it. It's a matter of combining it and collecting.
I'm gonna argue that social workers might document for the police officers. So if any of you are becoming a social worker, no.
And I will say, so the problem here that they found with the data is that everybody collects it differently from state to state. It's a standardization of the collection and where it goes and how it's shared, right? And so, and then you just don't have statisticians, like, like abundance of them,
Only if
maybe,
you have a lot of money.
right?
Maybe
Only
not.
really, really big departments usually get some statisticians or something else, but otherwise, like a small college campus, you are not. that position.
No.
Yeah, maybe you can get like a grad student that will like volunteer, but then where do you start? That's a huge thing, so.
I vote, but
Start Monday?
So a question for Chief Melinder. So what are some key principles and theories that guide modern policing practices?
Question. So, you know, there have definitely been different areas of policing that focused on different types of things. In the 80s, we had the community policing era, and we had the homeland security era. And all these different areas bring different aspects to policing, but there's some really firm principles that, again, guide the profession to the best possible outcome, right? So it's not about, saying, oh, well, we have a community policing program and we do this and we do that, because a lot of times those type of things just become catchphrases. They don't really mean anything anymore, right? You say, oh, well, we engage in community policing. Like, what does that mean? What is community policing? And there's no standardization, right? What does that mean to you as an agency? What does that mean as an individual officer? A lot of it comes down to just rebuilding relationships with people, getting to know people one-on-one. It is very easy to hate Chief Mullendorf because he's a cop. It's much harder to hate Jason, right? If you know me as a person, if you know police officers as individuals, which they are, then you're gonna understand that they have, their personalities, they have a drive, and most of the time you would find they're doing the right things for the right reasons. It's when you don't know them, when you don't see them as a person, that it starts to become the issue with, well, it's just policing is the problem. Well, what does that even mean, right? But there's a lot to that.
Right, so question for Sam. How have programs like STAR helped bridge the gap between mental health and policing? And could you describe some of the interactions?
Yeah, so STAR actually is, as an alternative response model, is not supposed to go out with police at all. So our co-responders probably are helping bridge that. I just want to add that our co-responders are bridging that gap as well. So STAR's model is that they should be going to calls without police, period, because they're providing that alternative response to police, right? Again, they're going to calls that come through our 911 system, our communication system that shouldn't require police on scene. They can, and they do, collaborate with police a lot, because police, now that they have this resource that is STAR, can say, hey, they show up to a scene, they get assigned by dispatch to go to a scene, and they go and they're like, we're not needed here. This person just needs resource, not just, but needs resource and support, right? Let's call STAR. We can actually do a soft handoff. We can do a phone call soft handoff if that's better, but we don't need to stay on scene. Let STAR do their thing without police presence. And we will move on to the next call that requires police officers there. So they do a lot of communication with that. And then also STAR can utilize police if they should, as much as we'd love to predict human behavior, we most certainly cannot do that. And if I could, I would be in a very different space. But yeah, so they can also utilize police if, we say on scene, if they're on scene and something goes awry and there's a safety concern that develops. STAR is not going to go on calls with a safety component because they are not trained police officers who deal with that safety element, right? Our co-responders are going to go on scene with police officers in order to provide mental health care, behavioral health care to people where there is a safety element or what we say higher acuity or higher risk. So we as dual programs are really bridging that gap between police officers and the need for mental health support by working with them, meeting them where they're at, literally and figuratively, and providing services to people who historically have had police to depend on in order to provide that care. STAR also utilizes police radios in order to communicate with dispatch and to communicate with each other, as do co-responders. And so they are in communication with each other and can kind of hear what's happening and can say, hey, I've actually met that person before. I think that's more, it might be assigned to an officer, and they might say that's more of a STAR appropriate call. We'll actually take that from officers, and officers are super appreciative of that, right? They didn't sign up to be social workers, we did. And so they like what STAR is able to take on a call or take on a community member who needs more support and the support they can provide. Historically, police officers have only had hospitals and jail as resources. As social workers, as licensed professional counselors, we have resources out the wazoo, and we will get creative if we don't know one, right? We will find one. That is our job. And so we can provide more than just a hospital, just jail. I think That's it. I'm sure I'll think of something.
Okay. All right, so one last question for everyone before we do Q&A. What is the best way for the public to learn accurate information about your fields beyond events like this?
Well, she mentioned the Urban Institute, so that I have that written down. Barrett Institute, Urban Institute, those that actually like kind of independent think tanks that go and researchers that will look at different programs across the country and provide digestible information about it instead of like super long reports. They do have super long reports if you want those, but they also create like easy to digest infographics, those types of things. So those are where I would send my students, like, you need your peer reviewed sources, but also here are some other really good sources to kind of bring in ideas and look at particular programs. That, and I do like TED Talks as well.
There's a lot of ways. One, you can do a ride along with the police department. That's something that is free. It's always available. Almost every police department will do it, and very few people actually do. You could go with the police, you could sit in the car, you could actually see what they're responding to and how they work. And I think it would add a lot of clarity for people on understanding why police do what they do and how they do it. Also, don't jump to conclusions. There's a 2-minute video that they show where things have gone really bad. Take the time to look at the other 50 minutes that they didn't show and how it led to that, and understand the totality of the circumstances. It doesn't mean it couldn't have been done better. It just means that there's more information that would help you really understand the totality of what happened. And so just having more information as a community helps you understand the police, which helps us do our job better. Because then we do have really good feedback from the community that's articulate and understandable and based on facts. And that's really what we need to be able to do our job best.
We have an amazing marketing team that builds great websites. So you can always go to those, but I don't think websites do the best job of actually explaining what we do as a program. And I don't know that any sort of marketing material will really describe what we do. And so what we really try to do to get the word out about our program is help other communities build programs similar. And so we get a lot of community requests from literally all over the country. And we just, Bahrain, the country actually just reached out to us, which is really awesome. So now all over the world, getting requests to say, like, we've read about your program, we've looked at Urban Institute stuff, we've just heard through the grapevine about your successful programs, and we'd like to build our own. So we're really trying to engage other communities. We also recognize that the way we developed our programs is not going to work for every. We're a metro area, we are not rural. That's a large difference in and of itself. We're, a Western state, we're not an Eastern state, which may make a difference for people. Climate might make a difference for people, right? And so we are just saying, this is what's worked for us. How can we help you make this program work for you? We try and go to conferences. We try and learn from other people too. We are not perfect. And so we absolutely are trying to learn from others. Again, we work with our community on STAR very, very regularly, and that's really important to us. So we're also trying to learn internally about how to better our program and get it out that way. And get our, encourage community members to say, if you know someone who's in crisis, please utilize our services. We're here to support you, and just really word of mouth stuff. And then we've actually had a lot of students reach out to us because they're doing dissertations or other research papers, and they just want to know more about our programs at that way. So we're social workers. We like to talk. We're always willing to talk to people. So word of mouth.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you all very much. I'll give some time for Q&A. I'll do one from the audience, then online and go back and forth. All right. If anybody has any questions.
What does the training look like for your STAR program for the clinicians that you're working?
Yeah, great question. So we require our STAR clinicians to be working towards clinical licensure. So educationally speaking, that means undergraduate degree and master's degree, and then having a master's degree that would get you towards that clinical licensure. It's different in every state. In Colorado, that's licensed professional counselor. So you get your master's in counseling, licensed clinical social worker, master's in social work, licensed addiction counselor, and then licensed marriage and family therapist. Those are our clinical licensures that we work towards. So that's educationally speaking. As far as I know, there are no current educational tracks that will specifically lead you to this path. And so we are just looking for people who are willing to learn on the job, have some sort of experience in crisis work, If you are working in the field of mental health, I guarantee you have worked in some form of crisis, because people have crises, you're human. And so we're just looking, have you had some sort of experience with crisis? We're also looking for people who have a really good DEI lens and are willing to work on their DEI lens, because again, we are trying to represent the community. And that's really important to us. And then once you're hired, we also provide internal training, because again, there's no like educational track as of now. That's the goal. So we have developed what we call Clinician Academy. It's a week-long 40-hour training for our staff that really trains them job-specific work. One of those trainings is a safety training, because they are going out into homes, into communities, into buildings where, again, we can't predict human behavior. People are in crisis. We aren't always ourselves in crisis. And so we provide like a 6-hour safety training for individuals. We provide training on comorbidity with substance use, with IDD diagnosis, with TBI. We provide DEI training. We provide mental health hold, or the 2765 statute training. So lots of internal training as well as all of our agency mandatory training too.
Kind of bouncing off of that, among this discord and controversy around policing, has been this conversation about education requirements for police officers. And just kind of openly to anybody, what are your thoughts on that? On like that masters versus PhDs for people who are carrying guns?
I can answer. I'm a huge proponent of education. I think it's incredibly important. I've worked on a college campus my entire adult life. The reality is it's expensive, time consuming, and traditionally policing hasn't paid what we typically expect from a job where you're putting that kind of effort and cost in. And this reality is the state requirement is a high school diploma. So there's been a shift in those requirements. Some departments do require education, but they also have to pay a lot. And right now, there's such a shortage of police because nobody wants to do this job that ironically, it's doing so much more harm because we can't get the kind of candidates we do need. Because to be a police officer, you have to make good decisions. You have to be able to make decisions quickly. You have to have a whole lot of information, because something that you have literally milliseconds to make a decision on will be torn apart by lawyers for sometimes years. So you have to make the right decision. You have to make it quickly. And again, finding those right people is a real challenge.
Just
Back to the principle about making that individual connection, seeing the human, also seeing the human and community member. How much do you feel like these issues arise, these systemic issues arise from these individual attitudes, or are is the system, the data suggests that the system?
Say the last part.
Yeah, like, or to the alternative, like, does the system change the individual attitudes? Perspective.
So that's a huge question.
I'm like, what are you?
And I think maybe to start answering that, I will say that police officers have to deal with the absolute worst that our society creates. You're going on horrible cases, going on people that have been truly victimized. You're doing things that most people, if they had to see it or deal with it or be involved in it, would be traumatized for the rest of their life. And police officers are getting that same trauma over and over and over because that's their job. Again, we're going to the very worst things that society can do, and we're expected to make it better, which isn't always even possible. And that does take a toll on individuals as well. So you say, does it change someone to be a police officer? Absolutely, it does. It would be naive to say that it doesn't. So we as a profession have traditionally been really bad at ensuring mental health for our staff. And that we are dealing with the trauma, the things that they're seeing, the things they're dealing with. We're getting better. We have co-responder programs where, or not co-responder, peer support programs where, it can have better access to those resources. We're doing more to ensure they have the ability to talk to counselors and get mental health help if they need it without that stigma or worry that, well, they're not going to let me be a police officer if they don't think that I'm able to deal with this. The reality is horrible things. And so, yes, it absolutely does change. Now, does that necessarily mean it's a negative? No, right? And sometimes I think the community forgets that police officers are doing these things over and over and over. And they're like, well, that officer was a real jerk when he pulled me over for the stop sign. He wasn't very polite. He just gave me a ticket. You don't know what that officer did right before he pulled you over. Could have been on a child abuse case or a traffic accident where, it was a fatal and people were harmed. But there's so many things that they have to do and they have to deal with that it does impact the rest of the things that are.
Yeah, well, briefly, when I teach community policing and, thought it summer of 2020 as well, right? That was the last time. You need breaks sometimes when you teach that courses. Well, and that's like even I think speaking to like what police go through, but I talk about healing on both sides and the experiences and the trauma and the vicarious trauma and everything. I mean, my dad worked in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, for 30 years. So growing up, like, yeah, there's a riot where you just gotta wait at home and see if it's okay, and luckily he only got stabbed with a rusty nail a couple times, but, those different types of things, if you bridge the gap and you find the familiarities amongst the two, because it goes back to like, we are all human and the experiences. And again, it goes back to like, are there some bad people in the world? Yes. And might they be police officers? Are they just citizens? Absolutely. But that doesn't speak to the whole bunch of people, right? Again, it goes back to systemic issues. How are we doing this? And up until recently, we stigmatized mental health. I mean, it still is, but a lot of the agencies I talk to, they're doing so much more for their people. Because I mean, police officers have high rates of, like heart disease, divorce, suicide,
Alcoholism.
like all those different things. And well, people should, well, why? And what could we do to make that better? And how do if you think about even just when you're in a bad mood, or you like, how do you approach people? How do you talk to your mom? And now you're expecting someone in a bad mood to talk to a complete stranger. So things to think about, and vice versa.
You did mention co-responders though, and I do want to add, we need to often talk about the second half of co-responders. I don't think going into this job, I ever expected to be like a marriage counselor, a divorce counselor. I don't know what to do with my kids because they have behavioral issues counselor with the people that we're sitting next to. And the really beautiful thing that we noticed as we co-responded and we built trust with our first responder peers, is that we were in the car with them, we say about 10 hours a day. And you have to build trust, right? I expect that if I'm in the car with one of my police officers, that they're going to protect me if something were to happen, right? And they have to protect me before they protect themselves because I'm a civilian riding in the car with them. And so you learn a lot about each other. And I think one thing that co-responders really did that, I don't know, there's no data on this, but I can say it from a qualitative stance, and someone who co-responded for years and kind of moved up, is that we are supporting our police officers, our firefighters, our EMS staff to seek out mental health, because to experience as a person who rode in the cars for many, many, many years, the amount of trauma that I witnessed was a lot, and it affected me, right? And I re-engaged in my own support services that I needed in order to make sure that I was the best person I could be and show up for the people that I was serving, right? And so we as co-responders really tried to destigmatize mental health within the police departments. And I think we did, right? We encouraged people to go seek supportive services. They did. I remember an officer once who called me because he was not doing well, and we got him into therapy, and now he's incredibly successful, right? But without that therapy, I don't know that he would have been. And so by trusting us, by showing us what it's really like to seek mental health support, and mental health providers are not just these like scary people who tell you, what's wrong with you. We're encouraging people who constantly are experiencing trauma. We're constantly seeing people at their worst. We're being, berated. We're not acting like themselves because of the trauma. We're encouraging people to seek out support. So it is support. Yeah.
Yes, we have a question from online. If London wants to ask it real quick.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Let's see. I think that'll be a little better.
Okay, you can hear me?
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I apologize. It might not be like a direct question, maybe more of a comment, just going off of some of the things that were said about education requirements for police officers. I do think there is a good argument to be made because the majority of police stations across the United States only require a high school diploma or your GED, which yes, and I'm sorry, I did not catch the officer's name, but as he said, education is expensive. However, if you think about the responsibilities you are putting on police officers, it feels like it may be more effective to have them trained in either some psychology, some sociology, some social work measures, whatever the case is, because you are working with vulnerable populations, like most of the time, especially depending on where you live in the United States. And if you want to, let's say, use the argument that a police officer is witnessing all these traumatic events and that's why they may not treat people a certain way or be as nice in certain situations, XYZ, I think further education is what can train an individual how to approach these situations. You don't oftentimes see like a social worker in a very traumatic situation on, let's say, a child abuse case, go and then treat their next client poorly based off that excuse as well. And I think that training really helps that individual understand how to work through their own trauma, how to assess and departmentalize their trauma and the trauma that they're taking on from these cases. So it feels like education would be a major step in the progression of police reform. Yes, it's expensive, but so are, deaths at the hand of police officers. So are lawsuits made because police officers are using excessive force or handling a situation wrong. And like there was a study done by the National Alliance on Mental Illness that found that roughly half of the people that die at the hands of police officers have a disability, either mental or physical. And so I feel like if police officers had the training to understand some of these psychological concepts or these sociological concepts to help them better make these quick decisions, like you were saying, I think we would see the cost of other things go down. And that's more of an investment. I don't think we would trust doctors to go and handle certain situations without education. So it feels like at the forefront of police reform should be further education for individuals or further specific training.
Can I make a comment to that? I agree with you. I think a lot more training needs to be done with officers so that they recognize how to work with, they don't have the same education as social workers, as licensed professional counselors, right? As someone who has a master's degree, I also recognize that education is privilege, right? It was a privilege for me to be able to go to college and then to pursue my master's degree. I also recognize I have a lot of my own privileges that I was able to pursue that. And it is expensive. And there's a lot of careers that we're looking at to say social work and mental health being one of them. We're seeing a huge decline in people coming into the behavioral health system as professionals because it's so expensive and you make no money coming out of it, right? And so the return on investment financially is really low. And in today's society, it's really hard to survive just your basic needs, right? And you have to pursue a master's degree to be able to do some of this work, right? So there's a lot of reform that needs to happen in our society and a lot of levels, not just in policing and not just some of the training that they might receive, but in our education system and how people have access to higher education, right? And how different communities have access to higher education, how we're supporting different communities to achieve, to get access to higher education. The one thing I also want to add to that is, as a social worker who's worked with people with severe persistent mental illness for 12 years, I have to work every single day to keep my composure and to compartmentalize and to not walk into different situations, depending on what my mood is, right? And I have definitely not been perfect, right? I have been on those really, really, really hard calls, and then I just have to turn around and go to another hard call. And pardon my French, but it sucks, right? And you have to work every single day to say, okay, I got to change my attitude. I got to change my space from this really hard call. And now I got to walk into someone else's problems, right? And compartmentalizing isn't, you do it because it's how you serve the people that you've committed your life and your work to. But it's not great to do that all the time, right? Like they teach classes in social work school of how to deal with the trauma that you will eventually experience and the vicarious trauma that you 100% will experience, right? And it's work every single day to be able to show up for your clients and then be able to show up for your partners, for your family, for your support system, for your community outside of work. So I just want to acknowledge the hard work that it is for mental health professionals as well, and the reform that needs to happen in many of our systems within this country.
My question is for the chief. Early on, you said that there's a ton of police interactions every day that go well. And there are a few that go poorly, and they are reflected in the media because of narrative, because of story. So from 2017 in Denver, from 2017 to 2023, the Denver Police Department paid out $35.3 million in lawsuits to people who filed grievances. How do you reconcile the narrative that you're trying to push of there's only a few things that go badly, when in the city of Denver, there was $35 million in lawsuits that the police department had to play out? How do you reconcile those things together?
So for one, how many cases does that involve? Because they're having $1 million lawsuits, right? Multi-million dollars on several cases. How many calls did the Denver Police Department respond to between 2017 and 2023? That's a very valid question, right? If you're gonna say, well, $35 million, but how many lawsuits was that? And when you look at those facts of those lawsuits, was it because the officers were completely wrong? Because they chose to do illegal acts or chose to do something unethical? Or was it a bad situation that ended poorly because there was nothing else they could do? There's so many aspects to all of this that people don't want to look at. And the black person said, well, doctors have to have an education. I believe in education. I've dedicated my life to it. If you mandate every police officer has a college degree, we won't have police officers. Because most people do not go to college to work a job where you work a lot of hours, middle of the night, on holidays, dealing with horrible things. That's just the truth. And so when you say, how do you reconcile that? For one, I don't work for the Denver Police Department. And you apply that to every police department everywhere and every police officer. And the truth is, it isn't apples to apples, right? And so if you want me to comment on something, I have to have the information. And so there's no answer I can give because I don't have the ability to say, well, out of the 2.3 million calls the Denver police went to on those, yes, they paid out fines on these cases, and this is why. There's a lot more information that we need to be able to answer that.
Okay, that's fair. I guess a follow-up then would be the 2020 protest, downtown Black Lives Matter protest. You'd be hard pressed to talk to anybody who attended those protests who had a good interaction with police. Secondly, if you talk to people in marginalized communities, the Black community, the queer community, different communities, you'd be hard pressed to find people who have ever had a good interaction with police. So how do you reconcile? There's only a few things when there are many communities who would say otherwise.
Yeah, and I think you're generalizing. And if you're gonna put that out there, it's important to have quantifiable data to say, look, this is what we've talked to, this is where we see. Because the reality is, the communities you're calling out are also the ones that need the most police services sometimes. They are the people that are victimized, they are the people that are hurt. And when they have a problem, they call the police because they are the ones that will show up to help them. Plain and simple. You can say the police don't have a good reputation, but when somebody's being assaulted, when someone's breaking into their home, when they're being harmed, they call us because they know we will be there for them. And we always have been. Yes, bad things happen. Yes, there are bad cops. The vast majority, though, will make sure they are safe and that our society is a place where people can thrive.
All right, we have time for one more question. Right here.
So I got two things with the education. I'm getting my bachelor's in criminal justice to be parole. There's nowhere in my degree works or anything that says I need to get any psychology, any mental health, any classes like that. So that goes back to I think I'll be educated enough to be a parole officer, but goes back to the police, I know it's high school diploma, but I don't know, I just don't think you can. I know mental health is really good, but I don't think it teach common sense or I don't know the word I'm looking for, but validate, not validate, but empathy for something that can't be taught in a college course. And going back to his question, I get it. Police have been in the media so many times, so many bad things, but that's all people Google is police shooting. Have you ever Googled police officer baby from a car? Police officer did this, police officer did that. I think everybody is just very focused on one thing and not looking at all the officers that do good. And then it just makes all these communities hate the police rather than, like you said, something happens to you. Somebody breaks into your house. You call the police. Like if somebody, you know, I've had bad interactions with cops, but at the end of the day, like if somebody was breaking into my house or I just think everybody should put to Google police shootings instead of, you know, what cops do. I just think it's very generalized and people need to.
My comment just because.
No.
Just briefly, I mean, she addressed it. Is that okay? Just a quick comment.
Would you all like to respond first, or would you?
I have one thing, because I have a comment on the education thing. So we have a lot of partners in European countries, Hungarian and from the Netherlands. And so they actually have they are much smaller countries, but they do require 4-year degrees. We're actually doing a professor exchange where basically a 3-star brigadier general is coming over and our professor's going in there and he's like the vice rector. But in order for them to be a police officer, they have to go through 4 years education and then to even move farther up. So most of their faculty are police officers, have JDs, PhDs, and have served in their military. Again, very small countries. Same with the Netherlands. And I remember asking them like, hey, what do you guys teach? And it is a lot of like a convergence of psychology, social work, criminal justice, all those types of things, and they take a different approach to safety over there. So but it comes again from broader systemic change, and unfortunately in America we just don't value education the same way. I mean, look at I'm not going to get watch how I say my words. Where our money goes does not always support types of education. I mean, look at the conversations amongst student loans and those types of things, right? Very different approaches in different countries. Can we get there? Sure, but we need the leadership and the people dedicated to change, and it takes time for sure. But I will say also research shows that there are different ways to support the educational growth of police officers, having them read peer-reviewed articles or attending conferences, those types of things. And research has shown those departments that support those initiatives have less use of force complaints against them.
I want to add to that for sure. I think everyone should take a course on mental health. Since specifically 2020, we are as a society experiencing more mental health concerns than we probably ever have before. Though a lot of those probably existed prior to 2020 and got worse because we lost all of our coping skills because of the pandemic, right? Or all the coping skills we were used to having that may have kept us stable or whatever stable looked like for us. And so we are finding that there are more places that are asking us to teach them about mental health, to teach them about de-escalation. We've taught from dentists' offices to public defenders' offices and everywhere in between, right? Because every place right now, everyone is I hate to say it, the numbers show 1 in 4 adults, 1 in 5 kiddos experiencing some mental health concern at any given point. And I can bet that number is probably a bit higher right now, especially since the pandemic. So if you have the opportunity to take, you're right, like I can't teach you how to real world experience mental health, but if you can at least get some sort of understanding on mental health and take a course because you are in school and you have that opportunity, I would strongly encourage it because we are all going to interact with people professionally or personally who is experiencing a mental health concern, and it's just good to be educated on that. And then I also want to just mention STAR one more time, because I know that's what we were here to talk about from my lens. Is that STAR is when people are calling 911 because they don't know who else to call and there's a concern happening. Of course, we're not going to those situations where there's a safety component, right? Someone has a firearm, we're not going to send STAR. That's not their job, right? And we recognize that people are still calling 911 and have had historical trauma with other first responders, not just police. People have historical trauma with medics. People have historical trauma with firefighters too, right? For various reasons. Not my story to share, right? It's not my story, period, right? And I want to be able to support people who are in crisis. And so that's why we develop alternative response models to support people who need the help and are finally willing to say, and make the call, or someone's making the call on their behalf to say, I need something. And we're gonna send out the appropriate response, and STAR is part of that appropriate response, right? When police, when fire, and when ambulances are not needed on scene.
All right, we are about 15 minutes over time, so I do want to be respectful of our speakers' time. Also, I want to thank them. Okay, and thanks again, everybody, for joining. If you have any questions, I guess if they won't stick around, please feel free to ask more questions.
Just say one thing really quick. If anyone wants to go through a TBI experiential learning on Friday, we have some spots open. It's from 9:30 to noon in the admin building. We're on breakfast burritos and I have a parking pad. So if you're interested, you can come see me. I'll wait for a few minutes and I'll get your name and email address.
Oh, one last thing too. On May 1st and 2nd, from 10 to 2, right on the south side of this building, we're going to have our 3rd annual Forget Your Stress Petting Zoo. So it's sponsored by the police department, and we work with our mental health centers on campus and mental health center Denver to sponsor that petting zoo. So I know running for finals is stressful, opportunity to get resources and pet baby goats.
I don't have one more thing. We're good.